Welcome to today's webinar on action items from creation to completion. I'm Andrew LaFlash. I'm a senior process safety consultant with Sigma-HSE. I've been involved in PSM and overall risk management for a little over 9 years now, specializing in PHAs and PSM auditing. Also have experience in other components, including management of your change program development and auditing, development electrical classification drawings, and all the other components that feed into process safety management. I've worked in a variety of industries, including specialty chemical and foam production, LNG production and handling, cosmetics, and aerospace. I started in oil and gas as a commissioning engineer for an LNG production facility in Angola, Africa. Moved over to the US performing as a facility representative for process safety for an LNG utility facility, and then have since made the transition into a consulting role working with a variety of industries and clients. So action items are one of the things that it's an important part of your PSM program. They come from many different sources, but it's also one of the areas where it's easiest to lose track of where we are with them. Have they been completed? Are we keeping up with that? Have due dates slipped? You want to look at, for your sources, you have your PHAs, both initial and your revalidations. Same for dust hazards. You have your 3-year PSM compliance audits that normally generate requirements for corrective actions as well. As part of your mechanical integrity program, performing your periodic equipment inspections, you can come up with deficiencies and required corrections there. Incident investigations may identify, corrective measures you need to take to prevent future incidents from occurring. And of course, part of the management of change process is identifying any potential corrections or changes to your process that need to be made as part of your plan change, be it, changes to your equipment, updates to your operating instructions, new training for employees, or just updating your PSI to make sure you have the current information readily available when you're looking at it in the future. So tracking your actions, there's multiple options available for tracking your items. The creme de la creme, the top notch, you have specialty software. A lot of them allow you to drop items directly in from the source. You can bring in PHA works or PHA profiles, drop it in, it fills it out, it will send reminder emails. It will say, hey, you have a due date, it's coming up, it's 30 days out, it's 15 days out, it's 10 days out, it's due today. And then, if you do miss a due date, you'll get your daily, this is overdue reminders. It's a great option if you have the budget available for it, but for a lot of facilities, they can't justify that additional cost to their operating budget. So what most places do, you'll track it individually by your source. You'll have whatever recommendations came from your PHA, and you'll have someone looking at that document and tracking there. And then somewhere else, there'll be an equipment inspection form, and elsewhere you'll have your MOC with the items there. If you have a small enough process, you have, there's only a small portion of your process is covered. It's really, you have one covered chemical. It's used as, excuse me, either your primary component, or it's something where it's simple stream. You're not going to have multiple actions open at the same time. That's a viable option. But if you get into that middle ground where you've got 3 or 4 covered chemicals, you may have 2 or 3 processes on your site, or you may have multiple sites with similar but not identical programs. Excel is usually where you're going to want to keep track of your action items. It doesn't have all of the great features built into the specialty software, but it's easier to keep track of your items, and it's not as cost prohibitive. An important part of tracking the items is to have someone that's responsible within the facility for tracking those items either, a process safety engineer or someone who has that component tacked on to their normal responsibilities within the process. So the important information to be tracked, you want to know where the action item came from, details of the action item, what are you actually going to be doing, tracking details, who's responsible, what's been done, and then your closure details. How is this closed? What documents support that closure? All right. So the action item source info, you have the study name, that way if you have someone come in, they say, I see you had your PHA last year. Can I see what action items you've taken care of, what you still have open? You can easily sort by the study name and identify, okay, this is what we have, this is the status for that study. You can do study type, if you did a PHA, a DHA, MOC, and that way you can figure out, all right, for this is what we have open, we need to take care of this, the date of the study, and then the site of the study. Especially if you have multiple sites, it allows you to easily compare your facilities one at a time, or if you want to see if you have similar action items across sites, and it will allow you to close them using similar methods for both sites to avoid multiple solutions for the same problem. So action item details, you want to make sure you have the question or the scenario that drove the action item, the risk from that scenario without the item being completed. That way, if it's a high risk, it's something that needs to be completed, ASAP, or if it's a low risk, it's something that you can put off until you have a shutdown or a turnaround. The equipment's not in use and you can go in and make the changes as needed. The action item itself, what the team of the audit or the PHA, DHA decided is the correct measure, and then the adjusted risk for the scenario once you have completed your action item. And then as far as tracking the details itself, the due date, you need to make sure you have a reasonable due date assigned to the item. If someone were to come in and perform a review of your action items and you have a due date that's 20, 30 years out in the future, there's going to be an issue with that, especially if you're saying, we're operating at risk, we need to correct it. If you can push it out 30 years, they're going to say, what, it's not really a risk, or you're operating at a risk, and that's not okay. Due dates do need to shift every now and then. Something can come up. It was planned to be corrected as part of a capital project. Funding slipped. You need to move that date back a little bit. As long as it's reasonable, it's fine to make these changes. You just want to ensure that you document the original due date, the new due date, and why you're making that change. Responsible person, this is the person responsible for completion of the item, different or potentially different from the person that's responsible for tracking action items on your site. So you want to make sure that, it's not just an action item floating out in the ether. There's someone that's specifically in charge of completing this item and updating you on its closure status. Actions that have been taken so far. So a lot of times it's not you have an action item and it's closed. There may be a short-term solution. Say you found that there's a vessel that's not appropriately protected by thermal pressure reliefs. Short-term action may be car sealing valves to the PSV in the open position, and then either removing those valves and straight piping to the PSV, or adding additional pressure relief valves in the future when you're able to. And then, of course, status of the item. You want to ensure that you're appropriately tracking if something's open, if it's in progress, if you started working on it, you just haven't completed the action yet, or if it's been closed and, action is in place, it's done, we don't need to worry about it anymore, but we need to keep this item tracked for proof of completion. For action item closure details, you want to make sure you have the date of closure. as well as the list of supporting documents that for the closure. If it's, you've changed the equipment, you need to update your P&IDs and develop a new operating procedure. List the revision of the P&ID that supports that change, as well as the new operating procedure that covers the different operating requirements for that new equipment. If it's something as simple as, adding valves to a lock valve program or a car seal program, list your site's car seal or lock valve program and just make sure you have proof that you have closed it. You don't want to just say an action item is closed and have nothing to show that validates its closure. All right. So action item follow-up, it's one of those things that as sites get busy, it can tend to slip. So you want to make sure you're determining a schedule. You'll follow up with the responsible person for each item in order to keep the status updated. Like I said, specialty software does have the option to set email reminders. It'll send out an email to responsible persons on the basis of, you can set it how you want. Usually it's your 90-day, 60-day, 30-day. And then as it gets closer, you get more frequent emails. Excel, you can set up conditional formatting for color coding as your due dates approach to remind the person that's tracking the items to follow up with the responsible person. Or you can just, depending on your level, if you only have a few items, have a calendar update in your Outlook calendar that says, check in with XYZ on status of this item. It really depends on the level of items you're tracking and how many you have open at a time. And then, as you're receiving these updates on these actions being taken, document them, put them in your tracking thing. So if something were to happen, your site gets audited, there's an incident, you have details on, we haven't completed it yet, but we're taking the appropriate steps. Here's what's been done so far, showing that you are on track to close it in a reasonable time frame. All right, so a closure form is going to be your best friend when it comes to action item closure and proof. It's usually a one-sheeter you can put over the top of any documents you need. And it will say the details of the action item, what you did, the person closing it signs it for proof of closure, and you've got those copies right there. You store all of that information with your site process safety information. And then you have an easy, binder, folder, digital location you can point people to for proof of closure to assist in audits. But first, a little bit more information about Sigma-HSE. So we provide actionable process safety solutions so you can focus on what really matters, protecting your business people, workplace, and the environment. We have laboratories in Europe and Asia for testing combustible dust, powders, vapors, liquids, and gases. And then we have consulting offices based in the US, Europe, and Asia for combined global consultancy, but then also that local expertise piece. And we really want to be your partner worldwide for process safety. So this is a quick and dirty action item tracker that I just whipped up in Excel. For this one, figure there's an action item coming from a PHA. It was example PHA. It was conducted 3/20/2023 at site A. We have the scenario number for reference back to the study. Scenario ID number is 3.4. And the scenario is there's high pressure, a manual valve, the 1013 downstream of HX1012 alpha was closed due to operator error. Cooling water is blocked in on the heat exchanger downstream of a reactor. There's the potential of overpressure of the shell of the heat exchanger greater than 3 times max allowable working pressure, which would result in a rupture and a fatality. It's a risk of 1, that's a high risk event, it's a fatality. The action item that was identified during the, excuse me, during the study was to implement appropriate thermal relief devices to prevent an overpressure of the heat exchanger's shell. Adjusted risk is 4. It's now a low risk. You've got appropriate relief. If you were to block in your water, the thermal relieves, no pressure, your shell doesn't rupture, no one's injured. You've just leaked water into a basin. Original due date is 12/31/2023. And the responsible person, Max Power, they didn't have the ability to put this in right away. So they've implemented a temporary solution, and they've put the downstream valves and the cooling water return car sealed open to prevent that block-in. And that will take care of it for now. And then in the future, when they have the ability to either remove the valves or implement new thermal relief valves, they can go add that to here, move it from an in progress to a closure date, and list the P&ID and the spec sheet for the relief valves that have been put in. And they can say, all right, it's closed in here. And then again, just a quickly developed action item closure form. You would put your study name, site, date, due date, the scenario number, closure date, a lot of the same information that you have in your tracker. Put it all right here, person signs off. You put this over a copy of your documents and you're good to go. You put this in with your PSI. That's your proof of closure if someone comes to either audit your process or if you want to show, say, someone from corporate that's reviewing your documents. Yes, we did do this. Here's our proof. Other ones that could happen if you have a equipment inspection of your boiler. Say it was today. Is at site B. This is question 7. So you go out, you're doing your visual inspection of your boiler. You see that there's rust with visible pitting. You can't put your thumb through it, but you can see that it's starting to be an issue. And you want to make sure you go ahead and you schedule the ultrasonic verification of your wall thickness to make sure you're still well within your safe operating limits. And you want to get that done fairly quickly. So you give yourself a month for it. Assign the person. And then as you do it, you can say, you know what, you come back and you have your ultrasonic inspection. And they do that, and you're still operating within that limit, but it's approaching that minimal thickness that you can accept. So you set your action item is to repair the boiler during your planned shutdown for the end of the year. And you can close this one saying, and you would list that as that. So you've closed your initial action item by performing that ultrasonic inspection, but now you have an additional item to track because the results of that inspection came back as, you know what, you're still safe for now, but you're approaching that limit. It makes sense to go ahead and make that repair. You've got a planned turnaround for the end of the year. Based on your where you're safe to wait until that period, you can go ahead and add that to your shutdown calendar. And then you would fill out your closure form for that action item resulting from the boiler inspection and have that on file. Are there any questions on the use of these forms? It's fairly simple to develop your own. The issue is, finding what works for your site, finding the information that on top of the necessary stuff, there may be extra things you want to track. You may want to have a section for comments. You may want to have, if it is something where it is a multi-step process, like a car seal and then implementation of new PSVs, what you're going to do for that stepwise. Maybe break it into 2 action items if you want one for immediate implementation of the car seal, close that, and then have one open for the long-term solution. It's really a facility-specific requirement. It's just making sure that you keep these items, in your view, what's going on, what's open, what's closed, and then when you do close it, being able to show everyone, yes, we did it, this is how we did it, someone's approved the closure, here's our documentation. Now, if no one has any questions or concerns on this so far, I'll make these example documents available with the presentation for further review on our website. I appreciate you joining us today to talk about action items and tracking them. And I know it's not your HAZOP, it's not your management of change. It's one of those items that tends to fall to the wayside. But as such, I think it's something we pay attention to and make sure we're on the right track with. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate you joining us, and I hope you join us for future webinars.